Who are you, stripped of who you think you should be? Eika Chaturvedi Banerjee uses ancient wisdom and mythology to help businesses and individuals find deeper meaning in their work. We spoke to her about how these age old lessons can help us build healthier and happier workplaces today.
So I've been in the corporate world for almost more than about 2 decades now. And I realized that my work life and my personal life were always very, very conflicted. And I used to often wonder why. And that's when I realized that everything that had been taught to me as being sacred, as being good in the years that I was growing up, so we were taught to share, we were taught to collaborate. Suddenly the rules became all topsy-turvy in the corporate world. So greed is good, competition is better, dog eats dog, it's about who ends up first. And therefore, naturally, there was to be a conflict within myself. So therefore, we realized that the only way to resolve the conflict, see, corporate workplaces are what they are. The only thing that you can realize, recognize, or reconcile within your own self is aligning yourself to it. The conflict can only be resolved from within you. Now, the fact is that if I have to resolve any conflict within you, Danish, or at the workplace, then I really need to know who you are, even if I have to help you become the best version of yourself, whether it's at the work or it's in your family context. We need to know who you really are. And who you are has to be a person who's stripped off everything that you think you are, or everything that you think you should be, or everything that's a part of your education, or the part of the scripts that we play in our workplaces. And every time we start peeling these layers, what's left inside of you is really who you be, who you are. And we found that ancient wisdom, our mythology, our rituals, our symbols, our stories, they are actually the most tangible unit of who we really are as individuals, as families, as peoples, as societies, as civilizations, as nations. Who we really are is what our mythology is, what our value belief systems are. So that's one reason why we work with ancient wisdom. The other one is actually far more cognitive than that, which is the fact that all the laws or the rules of corporate existence are 60 years old, 100 years old, and they are these classically Western binary frameworks, 2 by 2 grids and 3 by 3 supply chains and value chains that we've been taught in our MBA structures. But if you look at the societies we're working in, the fact is that we are applying these 2 by 2 grids and linear frameworks to very plural societies. We're applying 60 and 100-year-old frameworks to 5,000-year-old civilizations. And so naturally there's bound to be a conflict, which is the other reason that we work with ancient wisdom, because we believe that for a civilization that has been in existence for at least 5,000 years of documented history and possibly at least 12,000 years of undocumented history, we believe that a civilization that has continued for this long, unbroken, and has survived and thrived, they must have cracked some survival hacks, right? So that's why ancient wisdom. The first being about the fact that that there are survival hacks that exist in this long civilization and learnings that can be applied. And the second being that if I have to help you become the best, the healthiest, the wealthiest, the wisest, the most resonant version of yourself, I need to know who you are, stripped of what you think you should be and stripped of the scripts you lead. And therefore, we go back to ancient wisdom because that is your blood memory, that is your DNA, that is your civilizational memory that resides deep within you. And so ancient wisdom.
Right. So you're talking about if I have to become the best of me, I need to keep these things in mind. But on the contrary, the kind of workplace which we work in, there is always, when it comes to hiring, there is always this who is better than the other one. It comes to your KPIs, your KRAs, again the same thing. There is always this, and on one hand you're talking about collaboration, but on the other hand there's this other C of conflict. How will ancient wisdom and the knowledge which you talk of make it easy and it's a streamlined situation for?
So again, a very, very good question, Danish. And I've always found in all my work with senior corporate leaders and with organizations that we work with. So we do a lot of work in organization transformation, which is, culture and values cascades, purpose, vision, mission alignment. We find that an organization, so at two levels, right? Your question was about the organization and it was about the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So we find that when we work with organizations that are true to their purpose, organizations that are true to their DNA, organizations that are true to the country they live in, they actually tend to outperform any other organization or their competitive landscape. And I'll give you a very simple example, right? So we've all heard about Unilever. When Paul Portman had taken over Unilever about 7, 8, 10 years ago, and he had actually declared, and Unilever was a very powerful corporation to be able to do that, and has always been a very great favorite of investors and analysts in the stock market. And Paul Portman came in and said, you know what, I'm here to build out a 10-year company. I'm here to build a company that is able to transcend the next 10 years and become a sustainable company with purpose. So we will follow purposeful leadership, but it's going to take me time to implement this. So I will not worry with short-term results. And he actually refused to have investor and analyst conversations. Now imagine if a Unilever can beat the context and the immediate environment of competition, of dog eat dog, of who comes first, then it should be possible for organizations to transcend this. And if you look at any leading organization, whether it's IKEA, whether it's Shell, whether it's Levers, and these are companies that have lasted. These are sustainable, long companies, right? So at the this is as true. So this whole thing about being true to your purpose, to your own self, finding your own best self, is as true for organizations as it is with people. Now coming to people, and you're absolutely right, Danish. We've all heard about this whole space of VUCA, this whole environment of volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity. And this has been a trading term for the last 5, 6, 10 years. Essentially, VUCA describes basically the conflict that happens between us and the organization, between me and you. It's a question of me versus you and us versus them, right? And that is what we very fancily called VUCA. Now, the fact is that the last 2 years of the pandemic have actually dissolved or brought into climax this whole VUCA space. There has never been an environment more volatile, more ambiguous, more complex, and more uncertain than the last 2 years. And the learnings that have emerged, because everything that we had learned, these rules that you're talking about, the rules of competition, the rules of who comes first, the rule of, resource myopia of saying, let me gather more than the other person, let me breast the tape first. These are all rules that have actually collapsed over the last 2 years. And so spectacularly collapsed that we've had a lot of leaders reach out to us, actually saying, what are my questions? Everything that I had learned, which was taught to me as business wisdom, seems to have suddenly collapsed. So this perhaps is a great time, therefore, for us to actually go back and embrace our own best selves. The organizations will find their footing, but the fact is organizations are just collections of individuals. If each of us in our own self are able to become our best self, the organization will take care of itself. And that is where I find a lot of organizations putting their focus on right now. Because if you look at leadership across organizations, Danish, you find that leaders are always the very best. The leaders there not because the leaders in competition. And I'm going to take an example not from the corporate world, because there we tend to get very personal about it. But let's look at sports, let's look at music. When you see an A.R. Rahman performing, he's performing just for the joy of music. He is performing for his own passion. He's not in competition with anyone else. Or when you see a Roger Federer playing tennis, it's like God. It's like poetry in motion. He's not, more often than not, you don't even know who Federer is playing against, because it's just about him and him at his personal best. And the same thing applies to corporate organizations. And when you look at the best leaders, right? Whether you look at Steve Jobs, or you look at Jack Welch, or you look at GE, and you look at Edison, and you realize that they've all been working only upon themselves. And that's what really helps both an individual and an organization. See, the moment you're working only upon yourself, there is no counterparty now. So then there's no conflict either that happens. But
No,
if
but
there's
would
any part
yeah.
of you, if there's any part of you that, or any part of your energy that is actually spent in beating someone else, then that energy is not working for you,
Hmm. So
right?
you were you've mentioned quite a few of the blue chip companies, right? But there's on one hand you have the blue chip companies, and on the other hand you have family owned businesses,
Mm,
right?
mm,
So it's a very tricky situation, something which has been there for such a long time, the blue chip company, and a family owned business which is also for a very long time.
mm.
But the issues at both the organizations are very different. The top
Okay,
person from a family owned business wants to say that, I'm the person who's going to decide. It's a From the top, the decision will be taken and everyone has to follow. But on the other hand, let's say the decision is taken by the masses and say, okay, look, and then the leader will decide what should we do.
excellent.
Uh,
So let's
right? Yeah.
look at Danish to resolve this. Let's look at some of the one of the best family-owned business, which has been the most sustainable one in India. Let's look at the Tatas, right? So whether it's the Tatas or it is Unilever, the reason that the Tatas have been able to succeed, sustain, and scale over the last over almost 2 centuries of existence has been because they allow. So there's an organizational purpose that they live with, which is trust. There's an organization. You remember when we were children, Danish? There used to be this ad by Tata Steel. It was Jamshedpur ad, and it used to be almost a minute and a half long audio visual. And at the end of that, so there were shots of Jamshedpur, Tata Steel, their employees, the welfare schemes, etc. And in the end, they would say, "Ispat bhi hum banate hain." We also make steel, right? Because everything that underlines, and that's why I'm talking about the concept of purpose, that organizations that lead with purpose, it doesn't matter what their ownership is, it doesn't matter what their structure is, but organizations that lead with purpose lead with sustainability, lead with success, and lead with scale. Then it's a question of how individual purposes are aligned with that
Mm,
organizational purpose. That's
mhm.
whether you look at IKEA or you look at the Tatas, they lead with purpose at the organization
Yeah,
level.
that's a good word to keep in mind, purpose. Eka, tell me something. Is there a framework which individuals and organizations can have in mind when they're uh, deciding that what we need to do going forward in specifically in this year? And second part, there's a lot of hiring which is also going on, right?
Mm,
In a situation like that, how do you talk to your peers when you're not physically with each other,
mm,
keeping
mm.
your ancient wisdom?
So it's interesting you say that. I'm actually going to break this down, even your questions, into two parts at my end as well. So the first one is, how do you work upon yourself, right? So while, like you rightly said, purpose is a very lofty word. Individual purpose is an even loftier word, right? Organizations have had time, have had depth, have had scale to figure out what their purpose is. At our individual levels, our purposes are not that easily identified. So all of us have jobs to do, we have mouths to feed, we have school kids to send to school, we have houses to run, and that's where we sort of lose ourselves in the everyday. So I have personally found it very, very useful, and this is derived from the concept of the kshetra in Mahabharata. Kshetra, again, like a lot of Sanskrit words, it doesn't have a direct translation, but the closest I can get to it is my span. And I find it very useful to look at the world at the stage of three kshetras. The first one is me. So, just my area of control, just me in the context of myself, working on just self work. So, whether it's my physical self, whether it's my intellectual self, whether it's my emotional self, whether it's my spiritual self, keeping myself, like I said, healthy, wealthy, wise, and spiritually aligned. And that will help me find my purpose. So, that's our first area of coverage. The second area of coverage is mine. So, what's mine? What's mine in my personal context is my friends and family. What's mine in the organizational context is typically my teams, and my peers, my immediate peers. So this is my first degree of separation. What am I
Mm-hmm.
doing for them on a daily basis? What is my
Mm.
contribution? Why should I be there? What do I need to do? Who do I need to look after? While recognizing that unless I am healthy in body, mind, intellect, and soul, I will not be able to do anything for mine either. But once I've taken charge of myself, then I take charge of mine and help them. And then at the third level is what we call mankind. Mankind in my personal context is my larger family, my community, my tribe. In the professional context, it is my organization, it is my industry. But I found it very useful if we can just, have that objectivity of distilling our spans. That this I do for myself. And I'll give you a very small example of how it comes alive, right? Sometimes when I'm a team leader, I might get very upset that my team has not delivered. Some member of my team has not delivered on a particular task, and I take it very personally. And I get very angry and I get very agitated. I'm actually getting angry or agitated because I'm feeling a sense of helplessness and lack of control. If I could do it myself, I would do it myself. Or when your child doesn't do their homework, or when they're unwell or haven't brushed their teeth, little things like that. The reason that makes us angry is because we come from a state of helplessness. So distinguishing that, what could I have done, what do I need to do, what is within my area of control, and then figuring out how can I help the mind, and then figuring out therefore what's the organizational impact. That comes at the third level. So I found this useful, the framework of me, mine, and mankind, very, very useful in helping us resolve conflicts and walk the way forward. Of the three, the most critical by far is the me. And at me, one of the practices that I've followed and a framework that I've followed is, on everyday basis, I end the day figuring out what is it that I have done for myself today. How have I gone to bed better today than I was yesterday? And how have I engaged with my own self at the body, at the emotion or the mind, at the intellect, and at the spiritual level? And it doesn't need to be a lot of. It doesn't need to be something very fancy or very complex. At the body level, I could have just, today eaten fresh food and not eaten processed food, or I could have just gone out and exercised or done yoga, whatever it is. It is what I've done for myself. What have I done for myself emotionally? Have I found time to spend with my family? Have I laughed today? Have I called up somebody who really means a lot to me and had a conversation with them today? So how have I nourished myself emotionally today? The third level is, of course, the intellectual level. The intellectual level is very simple. What have I read? What have I consumed? What have I learned today? How have I grown in my knowledge, in my curiosity today? And the fourth one is spiritual, which I like I said, sounds big and fancy, but it's actually as simple as, have I spent 20 minutes in silence?
Yeah, yeah. I think
Have
that's a
have I been grateful to those that are around
yes,
me?
yes. I think on that note, let me just remind all our listeners, remember the three M's which we've spoken of, which Eika is talking of. And on that note, Eika, thank you very much for being part of the TUSB Conversation Starters. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Danish, for inviting me. And I do look forward to working with far more many people and organizations, helping them find their best self and their resonance.
We bring you perspectives from our top wellness experts all May long for Mental Health Awareness Month. So stay tuned. It's a great time to invite these experts to your organization to bring focus on your employees' mental health and wellness. Talk to our team to learn more.